Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha. Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha. There is a text that has waited centuries to be heard clearly. It is called the Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha, which means, roughly, the essential collection of established positions. It was composed by Appayya Dikshita, a scholar who lived in 16th century South India, most likely between 1520 and 1593, in the era of the Vijayanagara Empire. Dikshita was a rare figure, a man fluent in multiple philosophical traditions simultaneously, at home in Shaiva theology, Vedantic logic, and Sanskrit grammar all at once. His masterwork, the Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha, grew from a precise diagnosis of his time. The great schools of Indian philosophy had fractured into rival camps, each claiming exclusive access to the truth. Dikshita's answer was not to choose a side, but to demonstrate that every school, when followed with complete rigor, arrives at the same recognition. The text you are about to hear is that demonstration. It moves through 12 stages, from the first gathering of perspectives to the final silence in which all perspectives dissolve. These 12 stages are a reader's map, a way of orienting yourself as you move through Dikshita's dense and generous prose. The Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha is itself a prose philosophical treatise, not a poem with named chapters, and Dikshita's own section headings are technical rather than lyrical. The names given to each stage here are signposts added for the listener's benefit, not titles found in the original Sanskrit. With that understanding in place, let us begin. Phase 1. The Assembly of Sages. I bow to the Supreme, the unmoving light, who appears as the many sages to guide the many seekers. I bow to Appayya Dikshita, the great compiler, who gathered the fragments of the word into a single garland of wisdom. The self is non-dual, partless, and silent, yet the teachers of Advaita, Shankara, Suresvaracharya, Padmapada, and Vacaspati have provided different logical paths to reach this silence. Some say the individual soul is a reflection, others say it is a limitation. Some say the mind travels to its object, others say the world is a thought. In this inquiry, we do not encounter contradiction, we encounter a spectrum of logic. The skeptic asks, if the truth is one, why do the masters disagree on the mechanics? Does the presence of many fragments not prove that the conclusion is unstable? The answer is this: you are confusing the path with the peak. The sages agree on the peak. Brahman is real, the world is false, the soul is Brahman. The fragments exist only in the description of Maya, the great restriction of scope. Just as different physicians may describe the symptoms of a fever in different ways while prescribing the same cure, the sages provide different interpretations of the dream to help different dreamers wake up. The Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha exists to gather these variations. We study the many only to see that they all point to the one. The inquiry begins with a review of the four aims of human life: duty, which is the pursuit of order; wealth, which is the pursuit of security; pleasure, which is the pursuit of delight; and liberation. The first three are finite, dependent, and end in grief. The only aim worthy of a sovereign is liberation, and liberation is nothing but the removal of wrong identification. Before we analyze the many positions, we establish the primary instrument. The word of the Upanishads is the only instrument capable of perceiving the absolute. Perception and inference are valid within the world of appearances, but they are blind at the border of the infinite. In this inquiry, we follow the purport of the word, using logic only to clear away the debris of doubt. The assembly has been called, the sages have taken their seats, the goal is the one, the paths are many, the fragments are tools, not obstacles. Do not become attached to a single theory of how the illusion works. If one logic does not dissolve the ego, use another. We prepare now for the first great division. Phase 2. The geometry of the reflection. The tournament begins with a fundamental diagnostic question. If Brahman is one, without parts and all-pervading, why do we perceive a ruler and a ruled? How can the absolute appear split into the all-knowing and the little-knowing? The sages agree that the split is apparent and false. However, they offer different geometries to help the mind move from the many to the one. There are three primary models. The first is the model of the reflection, offered by the Vivarana school following Padmapada and Prakashatman. This is the logic of the mirror. There is the original, which is pure consciousness. There is the mirror, which is ignorance or its modifications. And there is the reflection, which is both the individual soul and the Lord. In this model, the reflection is real in substance. The smallness and suffering of the individual soul are properties of the mirror, but the substance caught in the mirror is the original sun itself. The advantage of this model is that it establishes immediate, essential identity. You are not like the sun. You are the actual light, currently caught in a geometric reversal. The second model is the model of limitation, offered by the Bhamati school following Vacaspati Misra. This is the logic of the jar. There is the infinite space, which is pure consciousness. There is the jar, which is the mind and body. And there is the space inside the jar, which is the individual soul. In this model there is no reflection. There is only limitation. The space inside the jar is not a copy of the space outside. It is the exact same space, seemingly cut off by a wall of clay. The advantage of this model is that it emphasizes that the distance between the Lord and the individual is a structural illusion. Break the jar, and the individual does not go anywhere. It is revealed to have always been the sky. The third model is the model of the appearance, offered by the Vartika school following Suresvaracharya. This is the logic of the phantom. There is the substance, which is pure consciousness, and there is the appearance, a functional phantom that is neither the original nor something separate from it. In this model, the individual soul is a total illusion. It is not the real sun caught in a bucket. It is a flicker produced by the interaction of light and shade. The soul has no reality whatsoever. The advantage of this model is that it prevents any sense of finitude from ever touching Brahman. The one who suffers is a character in a story who has no blood to bleed. Freedom is the realization that the self, as a separate person, never actually occurred. The laboratory weighs the three positions. If you feel disconnected, use the reflection model to see that your substance is the sun. If you feel small, use the limitation model to see that the walls are transparent. If you feel bound, use the appearance model to see that the prisoner is a phantom. Do not argue about which metaphor is truer. These geometries are surgical instruments. The awareness is the territory. The king has realized that whether he is seen as a reflection, a limited space, or an appearance, he remains the unbroken light. Phase 3. The home of the shadow. The inquiry moves to the center. The diagnostic question is this: Where does ignorance live? To exist, a shadow must fall on a surface. Since Brahman and the individual soul are the only two candidates in the universe, which one hosts the darkness? Ignorance hides the truth. If it hides Brahman, it must be near Brahman. But Brahman is pure light. How can the sun be the home of a cloud? The sages split into two great schools to address this paradox. The Bhamati school, following Vacaspati Misra, argues that ignorance lives in the individual soul. The evidence is personal experience. It is the individual who says, "I am ignorant." The darkness is a personal experience. If ignorance lived in Brahman, then Brahman would be an ignorant god, and this would destroy his omniscience. Furthermore, the souls are many. When one wakes, others remain asleep. This is only possible if each soul carries its own private cloud of ignorance. In this model, Brahman is what ignorance conceals, but the individual soul is the one doing the not knowing. It is like a man with a cataract. The sun is what he cannot see, but the disease lives in his own eye. The Vivarana school delivers a counter-argument. Ignorance is the cause of the individual soul. The soul is a result of the reflection. How can a house be the foundation for its own ground? Furthermore, ignorance is insentient. It cannot exist on its own. It requires the support of pure consciousness. Brahman hosts ignorance in the same way the sky hosts clouds. The clouds depend on the sky to exist, but the sky is never made wet by the rain. In this model, Brahman is both the locus and the object. Consciousness is the only thing large enough to support the film of the universe. The Bhamati school objects, if Brahman is the host, how does he avoid being ignorant? The Vivarana replies, by being the witness. The witness sees the darkness without being swallowed by it. The Vivarana school in turn objects, if the individual soul is the host, you fall into circular logic. You need ignorance to produce a soul, but you need a soul to hold the ignorance. The Bhamati replies, the circle is beginningless, like the seed and the tree. They have always been chasing each other. The laboratory weighs both positions. Use the Bhamati view to protect the majesty of the Absolute. It keeps the dirt of ignorance in the individual ward, leaving the source pristine. Use the Vivarana view to establish the radical priority of awareness. It proves that there is nothing, not even darkness, outside the One. Whether the cloud lives in the sky or in your eye, the solution is the same, the rising of the sun. The king has realized that ignorance is a parasite of light. Whether it sits in the subject or the object, it is removable. The locus is a technicality. The identity is the fact. Phase 4. The population of the dream. The inquiry moves to a radical question. If the world is a dream, can there be more than one dreamer? When you dream at night, the people in the dream seem real and independent, but when you wake you realize they were all secretions of your own mind. Is the waking world any different? The school of the single soul declares there is only one individual. This one individual is the dreamer of the entire cosmic theater. All other people, your parents, your enemies, even the sages and the gods are dream characters. They appear to be conscious, but their heartbeat is actually your own. The logical basis is this. If Brahman is one, the primary reflection must be one. There is no need to propose multiple owners for a single illusion. And the consequence is stark. You are the only seeker. You are the only one who will ever wake up. The school of many souls, supported by the Bhamati tradition, argues for a shared reality. We observe people at different stages. Some are born, some die, some are wise, some are foolish. If there were only one soul, then when you grew hungry, every person on earth would feel your hunger. Furthermore, when one person dies or is liberated, the world does not vanish for everyone else. The theater remains open when one actor leaves the stage, and there is the matter of the teacher. If I am the only soul, then the teacher who instructed me is a figment of my imagination. How can an imaginary teacher deliver real knowledge? In this model, there are many souls, each with its own private cloud of ignorance, sharing a common world while inhabiting it through individual lenses. The debate intensifies around liberation itself. The school of one soul asks, if there are many souls and one is liberated, does Brahman become partially free? Can the infinite be split into a free half and a bound half? The school of many souls responds, liberation is not a change in Brahman. It is the destruction of a specific mirror. When my mirror breaks, I as a reflection vanish into the sun. Your mirror remains, and therefore you remain a reflection. Dikshita also explores the possibility that liberation only truly occurs when everyone wakes up. Until then, the sage who wakes moves to a higher grade of the dream, waiting for the rest of the characters to follow. The laboratory weighs both positions. Use the doctrine of the single soul when you are ready for the final, ruthless leap. It destroys the other completely. It reveals that the entire universe, with all its history and stars, is a single thought wave in your awareness. Use the doctrine of many souls to function in the world. It provides the basis for ethics, for the teacher-student relationship, and for the shared pursuit of truth. Whether you are the only dreamer or one of many, the solution is the same: wake up. The king has realized that whether he sees one reflection or 1,000, he remains the unbroken source. The many is a count of shadows. The one is the fact of light. Phase 5. The projector of reality. The ordinary person believes in a world of hard facts. He thinks, the mountain was there before I was born, it remains while I sleep, and it will still stand when I die. My perceiving it is simply a report of an existing reality. The sages identify two ways to interpret this experience. The first is creation before perception. The world is an objective projection of the Lord that exists independently of the individual's gaze. The second is perception as creation. The being of the world is nothing but its being perceived. The world is a subjective projection that vanishes the moment awareness turns away. It is worth pausing here to note where this second view fits within the architecture of Dikshita's text. The doctrine that perception itself constitutes creation, sometimes called Drishti Srishti Vada, does appear in the Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha, but it appears there as a subordinate topic within the broader discussion of how the individual soul relates to the world, not as a fully independent division of the teaching. Dikshita surveys it alongside other subpositions within that discussion. The reason we are treating it with this degree of attention is that it is one of the most penetrating of the available views, and Dikshita himself gives it careful examination. Think of the extra attention as a magnifying glass held over a single stone in a mosaic, rather than as a claim that the stone stands apart from the mosaic. The school of creation before perception argues as follows. Brahman, associated with the total power of appearance, projects the elements, the stars, and the laws of nature. The world has empirical reality. It is real in the sense that it follows consistent laws and is shared by all souls. Creation happens first, and perception follows. This model accounts for continuity. If you leave a jar in a room, you find it there when you return, because the projection of the Lord maintains it. It is the responsible logic that allows for ethics, for science, and for the study of Scripture. The school of perception as creation delivers a different argument. When you dream of a mountain, does that mountain exist before you see it? Does it remain when you look away? No, the mountain is the thought. There is no unknown existence. A thing is only because it is a ripple in awareness. Perception is the act of creation. If the world had independent existence, it could never be negated by knowledge. By demonstrating that the world is entirely subjective, the sage makes liberation instantaneous. You do not need to destroy a physical universe. You only need to stop the gaze that is manufacturing it. The debate sharpens on the status of the unseen. The first school objects, if the world exists only in perception, then the stars vanish every time you blink. This contradicts the stability of the universe. The second school replies, the stability you perceive is itself a perception. You perceive the memory of the star and assume it persisted. You are imagining a history for something that only exists in the present flash of awareness. Dikshita notes that the school of perception as creation aligns most naturally with the doctrine of the single soul. If you are the only dreamer, the world is your secretion. If there are many dreamers, then creation before perception provides the necessary common ground for the shared dream. The laboratory weighs both positions. Use the model of creation before perception to navigate the world. It honors the Lord, respects the law, and allows the mind to settle into disciplined study. Use the model of perception as creation to finish the inquiry. When you are ready to wake, realize that the boulders and walls that frighten you have no more substance than a wisp of smoke. They are only as hard as your belief in them. The king has realized that the cinema is real as a light show, but empty as a fact. The projector is you. Phase 6. The Instruments of Discovery. The seeker asks, how do I know what I know? If the world is a dream, are my eyes and my logic also dreams? How can an instrument of the dream reveal a waking truth? The sages identify 6 valid instruments for navigating the empirical world: perception, inference, comparison, verbal testimony, presumption, and non-apprehension. They debate the inner workings of these tools not to defend them against outsiders, but to calibrate them against each other for maximum resolution of the truth. The Vivarana school holds that perception is the literal identity of consciousness. When the mind wave takes the shape of a jar, the light in the mind and the light in the jar become one coordinate. Perception is a reunification. The Bhamati school holds that perception is a refining of the image. The mind does not necessarily travel to the object, but the sense organs act as filters that allow the self to illuminate the form. The two schools also debate whether the internal organ, the mind, is itself a sense organ. If it is, as the Bhamati school suggests, then knowing oneself is a type of perception. If it is not, as the Vivarana school suggests, then the self is known through the word alone, and the mind is merely the field where the word strikes. On inference, the sages agree that while inference can clear away the arguments of dualists, it cannot behold the absolute. Brahman has no marks by which inference could grasp it. Inference is a negative weapon. It clears the jungle, but it is the word that reveals the palace. The most intense debate concerns the great sentence, that thou art. One view holds that the sentence produces immediate vision the moment it is heard, provided the student's mind is prepared. Another view holds that the sentence only provides indirect information at first, and requires the work of meditation to be converted into direct experience. Dikshita notes that the view of immediate vision is the preferred logic for the sovereign. If the truth is already present, a report of its presence is enough to end the amnesia. If you have to work to see it, it is not your nature, it is a product. The sages treat the instruments of knowledge as medicine within the dream. Perception deals with the hard data of the dream. Inference deals with the logic of the dream. The word deals with the exit from the dream. Once waking is achieved, the tools and the knowledge they produced dissolve into unconditioned awareness. Phase 7. The spark and the fuel. The student, having understood the logic of oneness, asks, if knowledge alone is the cause of freedom, why should I bother with the labor of duty? Why perform rituals or meditate on a personal form of the divine? Is action not just a heavier set of chains? The sages identify two modes of preparation. The first is selfless action, the performance of duty without attachment to its fruits. The second is meditation, the focused contemplation of a qualified form of the Absolute. In this inquiry, we do not defend action as a goal in itself, but as a technical necessity for the unpurified mind. The debate concerns the specific function of action. The extreme view holds that rituals have no connection to knowledge whatsoever and belong to a different world entirely. The integrated view holds that rituals are the indirect cause of knowledge because they produce the hunger for truth. The sages debate whether action produces knowledge itself or only produces the desire for knowledge. The Vivarana perspective is this: action is like scrubbing a mirror. The scrubbing does not create the sun. It only removes the mud that prevents the sun from reflecting. Action exhausts the restless energy of the ego and the heaviness of the body, leaving the mind transparent and ready. If action cleans the mirror, meditation steadies the hand. A mind that is scattered cannot hold the high-frequency recognition of that thou art. By meditating on a form, the mind learns to remain in one coordinate. Meditation gathers the scattered filings of thought. Once the mind is focused, it can be used as a surgical instrument. Whether this focused preparation is required for everyone is itself a subject of debate. Some positions within the spectrum suggest that for a rare few, the word strikes instantly. For others, the altar must be built over years of devotional focus. The sages classify the supports of knowledge into two kinds: the remote means, which include action, charity, and austerity, and which work from a distance to bring the seeker to the path, and the proximate means, which include hearing, reflection, and meditation, and which work directly on the mind to produce the recognition. The action of the deed is like rocket fuel. Once the vehicle has left the atmosphere of the world, the fuel tanks are released. To cling to rituals after the mind is purified is to carry an empty tank into orbit, but to attempt the launch without fuel is to remain grounded in a merely theoretical understanding. The king has realized that he is the fire, but the fire needs an altar to be seen by the mind. Ritual and worship are the building of that altar. Once the fire is roaring, the altar is seen to be nothing but heated awareness. Phase 8. The direct strike. The logician argues, words are symbols of the absent. If I say there is fire on that hill, you know of the fire but you do not see it. To see it, you must walk to the hill. Therefore, the great sentence that thou art can only provide indirect knowledge. It tells you that Brahman exists, but it does not reveal Brahman. For direct vision, the student must perform the work of meditation. Knowledge is the map. Meditation is the journey. The sages identify a unique property of the subject of this inquiry. Unlike the hill or the fire, the self is never absent. It is the most immediate fact of existence. The question is whether the word can trigger an immediate recognition of something already present. The Vivarana school delivers its answer. Knowledge is direct or indirect based on its object, not its instrument. Since the self is always immediate, any valid instrument that reveals it must produce direct knowledge. The great sentence is a linguistic instrument of precision. It does not describe a distance. It removes a conceptual obstruction. The moment the sentence is heard by a prepared mind, the thought of ignorance is incinerated, and the self-luminous recognition occurs instantly. In this model, you do not meditate to see the truth. You meditate to clean the lens. Once the lens is clean, the word strikes, and the recognition is forced upon the eye. The Bhamati school argues for a two-stage process. First, the word produces a valid but indirect understanding. You know you are Brahman, but it feels like a theory. Second, you take this indirect understanding and deepen it through repeated meditation. This work transforms the indirect understanding into direct vision. The Vivarana school objects, if meditation causes the vision, then the vision is a product of the mind, and anything produced by the mind is temporary and false. Brahman is not a product. The Bhamati replies, the meditation does not create Brahman. It removes the appearance of unreality from the mind's perspective until the truth is all that remains. To settle the debate, Dikshita revisits the story of the 10th man. 10 men cross a river and count themselves, each forgetting to count himself. They grieve, believing the 10th man has drowned. They have genuine grief over a false belief. A passerby shouts, "You are the 10th man." The man does not meditate on being the 10th. He does not work his way toward the realization. The word of the passerby immediately converts his grief into recognition. The error was cognitive, a forgetting of himself. The cure was linguistic, an identification of himself. The result was instantaneous. The laboratory weighs both positions. Use the Vivarana view to establish the absolute authority of the word. It prevents the seeker from turning the path into an endless work project. It reminds the king that he is already free. Use the Bhamati view if the word has not yet struck. If you know the truth but still feel like a separate person, then continue the practice, not to create the truth, but to starve the ego's habits. The search ends in the hearing. Sovereignty is the realization that you are not waiting for a mystical experience. You are listening for the key that unlocks your own nature. Phase 9. The suicidal thought. The logician poses a paradox. You say the mind is a finite instrument born of ignorance. You also say Brahman is infinite and beyond the mind. How can a small, flickering thought wave ever capture the infinite? If the mind captures Brahman, Brahman becomes a limited object. If it does not, your knowledge is just a blank stare. The sages identify a unique mechanical event. The mind does not capture Brahman as an object. Rather, it undergoes a total structural alignment. In this inquiry, we examine the Brahmakara vritti, the thought that takes the form of Brahman. We demonstrate that this thought is not a container, but a surgical solvent. The mind wave has two functions. The first is the taking of a shape, as when the mind takes the shape of a jar. The second is the revealing glow of consciousness that illuminates what the mind has touched. For an ordinary object, you need both. The mind takes the shape, and the reflected light reveals it. For Brahman, only the first is required. Because Brahman is self-luminous, he does not need a glow to be seen. The thought wave that takes the form of Brahman simply flows out and destroys the veil of ignorance. The moment the veil is pierced, Brahman shines by his own light. The wave did not know him, it simply uncovered him. But if the knowledge of Brahman is a thought, does it not stay in the mind as a new modification? If so, duality remains. The answer is this: the thought that takes the form of Brahman is a suicidal thought. The sages offer three analogies. There is the clearing nut, which when put in muddy water gathers the dirt, pulls it to the bottom, and then dissolves itself, leaving the water pure. There is the forest fire, which starts by the friction of two branches, consumes the entire forest, and then having no fuel remaining, extinguishes itself. And there is the medicine, which enters the body, kills the infection, and is then expelled by the system, leaving the patient healthy and empty of the drug. The final thought is the medicine. It destroys the ego. It destroys the appearance of the world. And then, having no other to sustain its own existence, it incinerates itself. What remains is not knowledge, it is being. The sages debate the reality of this final thought. One view holds that it is a real modification of the mind stuff, but transparent, like a glass through which the sun is seen. A more radical view holds that it is the last and most sophisticated lie of the shadow, the good ghost that kills the bad ghost and then vanishes. Dikshita notes that the status of the thought does not matter once the result is achieved. Whether the ladder is real or a dream ladder, it has delivered the king to the roof. Once on the roof, the king does not look back at the ladder. We have demonstrated that the mind can take the form of the infinite without limiting it. Knowledge is a destructive act, not a creative one. The final thought is self-dissolving. Stop trying to keep your realizations. Keeping is an act of the hoarding ego. Allow the logic of the word to take over the mind completely. Let the wave expand until there are no shores remaining. When the mind becomes the all, the mind ceases to be. The thought has returned to the flame. Phase 10. The life of the ghost. The logician poses a final challenge. If knowledge truly incinerates ignorance, and ignorance is the material cause of the body, then the sage should vanish into light the moment he wakes up. If he still eats, talks, and grows old, then his knowledge has failed to destroy its object. A living free man is a logical contradiction. The sages identify a distinction between the destruction of a cause and the exhaustion of its momentum. In this inquiry, we examine the status of the sage as a survivor of the mirage. The most widely accepted answer is the logic of the potter's wheel. Knowledge destroys the accumulated seeds of past action and prevents the accumulation of future seeds, but it does not stop the momentum of the current life force, which was already set in motion before the recognition occurred. The potter spins the wheel with a stick. He removes the stick. The wheel continues to spin because of the momentum already stored in its motion. The sage is the unplugged machine. The current of ignorance is cut, but the biological momentum continues until its energy is exhausted. He inhabits the body like a traveler in a rented room, knowing the lease has already been cancelled. The sages debate the quality of the sage's vision during this remaining time. One view holds that the sage sees duality, as we all do, trees and people and stars, but has dissolved the reality he once projected onto it. He sees the snake, but knows it is a rope. He is like a man with double vision who knows there is only one moon. A second view holds that as knowledge deepens, the very form of the world grows transparent. The many looks like a fading shadow. A third view holds that the sage sees only the self. He does not see people. He sees Brahman appearing as people. To him, the world is not a thing to be tolerated or ignored, but the very texture of his own awareness. How can even a small remainder of ignorance persist to support the body if knowledge is absolute? Dikshita explores the concept of the trace. Ignorance is not destroyed like a smashed pot. It is dissolved like a cancelled debt. A trace of the power of ignorance remains to allow the biological functions to continue. This trace is like the scent in a jar after the musk has been removed. The scent is not the substance, but it creates an atmosphere. This atmosphere of identity allows the sage to remain functional without being bound. Freedom is a change of identity, not a physical disappearance. The body's momentum is a mechanical echo, not a spiritual fact. The sage is the witness of the ghost, never the ghost itself. Stop trying to enlighten your body. The body is a shadow, it cannot be lit. Realize instead that you are the stationary sky through which the arrow of destiny is currently flying. The arrow will reach the ground in its own time. You are already at the destination. Phase 11. The final exit. The tournament reaches the final horizon. When the arrow of destiny hits the ground and the biological breath stops, does the soul travel to a secret realm, or does it dissolve into the absolute? What is the final status of the reflection? The sages identify this as the state where there is no longer even a sublated appearance of duality. It is the absolute end of the individual project. For the ordinary person, death is a relocation. The subtle body, the mind, the senses, and the vital energy gather themselves and move to a new birth. For the sage, death is a dissolution. The gross body returns to the 5 elements of the earth. The subtle body, having no desire left to drive it, breaks apart, and its components return to the cosmic elements. The causal body, the ignorance that supported the reflection, has already been incinerated by knowledge. The sage does not leave the body. Just as the space inside a jar does not travel to the sky when the jar breaks, the awareness of the sage does not go to Brahman. It is found to be already and only Brahman. Liberation is the removal of a linguistic boundary, not a change in spatial coordinates. The sages debate the scriptural descriptions of the path of light. The highest view holds that for the knower of the supreme Brahman there is no path. His breaths do not depart. He is Brahman, and he remains as Brahman. The path of light is a description intended for those who worship the divine in a qualified form. A second view holds that even the sage follows a subtle path to the world of the Creator, where he remains until the end of the cosmic cycle, finally dissolving with the Creator himself in what is called gradual liberation. Dikshita clarifies, the final exit is not a place. If you go to a place, you can be sent back. True freedom is non-departure. It is the realization that the traveler was an optical illusion produced by the mirror of the mind. What remains when the last shadow falls? It is not non-existence, for non-existence is a thought that needs a witness. It is not a person, for a person requires a boundary. It is a solid, partless mass of awareness. The sages use the image of water poured into the ocean. The cupwater is not destroyed, but it can no longer be identified as a separate this. The I-ness of the sage expands until there is no not, I left to provide a border. The many has been reduced to the infinite one. Death is the breaking of the jar, not the movement of the space. The sage is bodiless because he has relinquished the very idea of body. The destination is the substratum that was never left. Do not fear the end of the body. The body is a lease you have already cancelled. Your current sense of smallness is an optical artifact of the mind's focus. The falling of the form is just the final punctuation mark in a sentence you have already finished reading. Phase 12. The Sovereign Silence. The skeptic asks, you have shown 100 different ways to explain the dream. You have analyzed the reflection, the limitation, and the appearance. But if the sages disagreed on the mechanics, how can we be sure of the conclusion? When the debate ends, does anything remain but a heap of broken logic? The answer is this. You have mistaken the scaffolding for the palace. The various fragments of the tradition were never intended to be absolute truths. They were surgical calibrations for different grades of mind. Just as white light is split into colors by a prism so that it can be studied, the one truth was split into schools so that the intellect could approach it. Sovereignty is the act of stepping through the prism and returning to the white light. Dikshita concludes that the difference between the schools is functional while the unity is essential. The Vivarana school spoke of the mirror to prove that your substance is the sun. The Bhamati school spoke of the jar to prove that the walls are transparent. The school of perception, as creation, spoke of the gaze to prove that the world has no independent existence. The manyness of Advaita is a mercy for the seeker. If one logic does not dissolve the ego, use another. But once the ego is dissolved, the engines fall silent. The conclusion is not the victory of one school over another. It is the massive silence that remains when all schools have finished their work. What is the status of the king at the end of the spectrum? He is no longer a seeker who prefers one theory over another. He is the substratum of all theories. He is not the reflection. He is not the limitation. He is not the appearance. He is the solid, partless mass of awareness that allowed the ideas of reflection, limitation, and appearance to be imagined at all. Sovereignty is the recognition. I am the screen upon which the sages painted their maps. I am the silence that makes their roar possible. Even the logic of non-duality is technically part of the world of appearances. The thought of oneness is the final medicinal herb that, after curing the fever of division, must itself be expelled from the system. The thought I am Brahman is a thorn used to remove another thorn, the thought I am the body. Once the first thorn has done its work, both thorns are released. The expedition through the Siddhanta Lesha Sangraha is complete. The 12 phases you have just moved through are a reader's map drawn for the benefit of the listener, not divisions inscribed in Dikshita's original prose. But the truth they have been pointing toward is entirely Dikshita's, and it is entirely the traditions. The various schools are the roads, the differences are tools. The silence is the destination. The spectrum has faded into the light. You are the foundational isness. You no longer need to argue for your freedom because you have recognized that your bondage was a logical error that can no longer be sustained. The king is seated. The spectrum is closed. Only the self remains.